the record button as well. So Neil, for your peace of mind, we've tested this in advance and the recording works brilliantly. So let's get started. Over to you, Louisa.
Great, thanks. So I'm just going to share our screen. So please let me know if you could just either unmute yourself and give us a wave if you can't see this, or send us a message if you can't see our page.
Yep, can see it fine, yep.
Okay, great. So as you'll know, this week we're focusing on waste and recycling. And this week we were based in Northeast Derbyshire District Council offices for our user interviews. So just going into our findings from our user interviews, I know that many people have shared their findings with us as well, so thanks for doing that yesterday. But the key findings that we had from our interviews were as follows. We found that most of the tasks that people were trying to do by getting in touch with the council were either looking for information or it was a simple service request. And all the people who called the council said that the calls were dealt with quickly and easily. So one thing that this tells me is that, number one, it's not a very complex type of interaction that people are having. These are quite simple interactions, and the fact that once they do get through to someone on the phone, the experience was really positive, and they say that people dealt with things quite quickly. It was very efficient. So this just kind of, again, reflects the nature of this as being, again, quite a simple interaction. It's worth noting that for our interviews, we spoke with people that were either requesting new bins or looking for information as to when bins were collected, saying that their bins had been damaged. We didn't speak to anyone who was reporting fly tipping. It's worth noting. I know that some of you in other councils interviewed people who have gone through this, and maybe you have different processes for this, but it's important to note that we didn't speak to anyone that went through that experience. On the note of this being something reasonably quick and easy once you get through to the phone, or the fact that you're asking for information or a simple service, is reflected in the fact that majority of users, so essentially all bar one, defaulted to using mobile. They all said that it's not something that they need a desktop. Compared with planning, for example, where there's a lot of information, it's very complex, they would prefer looking at things on their desktop, so there's a bigger screen, there's more room to see things. Most people did stuff through their mobile because it's just a quick and easy thing. Again, you can access the internet on your phone, call through your phone. Mobile phone was definitely the kind of main channel and device that people used to contact and access council services. What we did find, though, is that pretty much everyone that we spoke to had a really difficult web experience on the council website. This resulted in either a lot of back and forth within the website to find what they needed. Some of them had to go back to Google for better search functionality, i.e. they tried finding what they needed on the council website but couldn't find it. Went back to Google to find such a thing. Or they just called the council because they tried to find something and then were stuck, so it was just easier to pick up the phone and speak to someone. On that note, everyone that we spoke to were kind of trying to gauge the differences and the pros and cons between different channels, and everyone said, I would prefer to self-serve, I would prefer to find and do things myself where I can. But people would not hesitate to pick up the phone if they become stuck or if something is taking them a little longer than it should, or it's proving to be a little bit more difficult. It's just very easy to pick up the phone and get something sorted. Particularly going back to the first point, if this is meant to be a very quick and easy, looking for information, very quick service request. So it just shows that there's a big opportunity here to better serve people online. And the last point was just a really interesting one that came through, is that ultimately these users, they are paying customers. People are paying council tax to either get their waste and recycling collected, or they are paying for a new bin, for example. But in this case, it's not that like they can switch if they have a bad or unsatisfactory service. you are stuck with a council that you have wherever you live. So it's really interesting that they are customers, but they don't see that they have the rights to maybe complain as much. Many people mentioned how they felt bad for complaining, or they didn't really want to take up many people's time, even though they're paying for a service to take place. Ultimately as well, if an issue isn't resolved, like their bin isn't big enough or whatever the case may be, people are having to adopt usually quite inconvenient alternative solutions, like taking their rubbish to the office or having extra trips to the local tip. So it just shows how important it is to give people access to the right service, or hopefully help them resolve them. In regards to the in regards to the experience map that we put together, again, we're not going to go through this in detail right now. This will be shared with all of you, and I know that you all shared a version of what you did with us as well. What I've noticed with all the journeys that people went through, is that it all started with a trigger need. So you're at home and you notice that something is wrong. This can either be a non-urgent thing, like you just want to know when you're, what type of waste needs to go on each bin, or it's something that you can put off, like a lot of that life admin that just gets put off until you absolutely have to deal with it. Or you start off being quite angry, like your neighbor might have stolen your bin and you're like, damn, I've got no bin, I need to call the council and sort this out. Pretty much everyone then starts with going into an online search. And, we all know that Googling, you Google stuff, it's a verb now. Everyone will start on Google. They will find their council website. But this point is something that we found through other research areas as well, that people are confused as to which council they should be contacting, with some people even saying, I have to check the logo on the website and look at letters that I have to make sure that it's the right council that I'm contacting. Like I said before, as they got onto the council website, people were usually very confused, not finding the information that they needed. Their expectations weren't being met, at which point they contact the council. People were very happy at this point. They're like, oh, I was quite surprised at how quickly I resolved this, but I wish I could have done this online. And finally, the task resolution. So, has your issue been resolved? Have you, if you're happy and you've got your new bin, or the issue has been resolved, then great. But if not, this can lead to a lot of issues that impact people's lives in a really real way. Either people that have too much waste that isn't being collected, and as one person said, oh, it's very frustrating that when the bins could get collected, I still have 3 other bin bags just waiting to go into the bin outside. So this is something that's impacting people's lives in a real way. Overall, though, this was a really simple journey, I find, and I think that there is lots of opportunity to improve access to information and the ability for users to self-serve on the website. A final point is around reactivity and proactivity. So we had a few quotes from users that were quite interesting. A lot of them were contacting councils because they had just moved house and they wanted to find out, what waste goes in which bins, when bins are collected. Maybe they don't have a bin and they have to buy one. Just setting up the basics for your day-to-day life. But they would have expected to have some information from the council when they moved in. One other user mentioned how he called the council to sort out bins, and after he did that, he got a call back from the council to get his council tax sorted. And he was just moving house, he has a million jobs to do, and he was so happy that the council was proactive, that they called him, and he was like, that was great, it's one thing less on my list to do. It was great that they knew that I was moving in and they called me. And I just wanted to finish that point in saying how proactiveness with customers nowadays is a positive thing if done right. Anything in any way that we're helping people to get jobs done with the least amount of effort is a plus. So that's it in a nutshell from me. What I'll do now is I'll hand over to Tom to speak about his stakeholder interview findings.
Thank you, Louisa. And do feel free to to pop in with your own questions or comments or observations as I go along. So I spoke to 9 people from across the councils this week, which was really useful. And also worth calling out that the data shared was really strong this week, so it's enabled me to pull in quite a few data-led observations, which I've summarised in the following slides. And there were a lot of similarities across Louise's user research side and my stakeholder and data analysis. The key point is that the vast majority of calls to the call centres to do with waste and recycling can be handled by a first-line operative without being forwarded through to a back office team, so a specialist service team, or arranging a callback. It's a very predictable, fairly small set of inquiries, which we'll dig into a bit later. But this bodes really well in terms of assessing the service at a very high level for chatbot suitability. When looking at call volumes as a whole, waste and recycling makes up a fairly significant proportion, so 14.5% across the 4 councils that I looked at. Compared to planning last week was quite small, so this that averaged at 4%. This corresponds to obviously a bigger potential saving in terms of reducing inbound calls. Last week, just looking at Oxford numbers for planning, it was a potential saving of about 38k. If you do the exact same analysis comparison for Doncaster with waste, it's about 180k just for that one council, and then when you scale it across the 4 councils, it's more than 1 million potential savings. So, which we've got in this. So yeah, looking at the 4 councils as a whole within waste and recycling, there's potential there for reducing inbound calls costs by 1.1 million. Now, obviously, and I think I said this last week, chatbots aren't free and they take some maintenance, so it's not like that 1.1 million can just instantly cash in the till. But as a comparison across the 2 services, there's great potential within waste and recycling. As Louisa said, users would like to be able to self-serve, and there's a little bit of discrepancy between the various councils in terms of the extent to which all of the waste and recycling services are available as self-service. So, for example, some of the councils don't yet have the ability to do to query a missed bin collection via the website, or to order a replacement bin. It's not the case across all the councils. I think Doncaster in particular, you can do absolutely everything that you could do on the phones via the self-service part of the website, whereas other councils are currently working at growing their self-service offering to try and encourage people to be using the website as opposed to picking up the phone. Another variance between the councils was the extent to which real-time data is available. Particularly I'm thinking about where on the back of the trucks that are doing the collections, all the councils have got some sort of function buttons whereby if you're outside number 12 on this road and they've presented their bin with, it's contaminated with non-recyclables, press that button and it logs against that address, so that if the person subsequently phones up, the operations team have got that data explaining why the bin wasn't collected. Some councils that is going in real time, so immediately if someone phoned up, that information is there. Other councils, that only gets uploaded once the truck gets back to the depot at 4 p.m. So if someone phoned during the middle of the day, that wouldn't be available. But that sort of real-time data is very powerful in terms of enhancing the ability for people to self-serve and do these queries online as opposed to picking up the phone. Yeah, and lastly, echoing Louisa's point, preempting customer needs is a really obvious way to reduce the need for users to make contact. So often customers are phoning with a follow-up to an existing inquiry that they've made. For example, they've ordered a new bin. They were told it would arrive in 5 days. For whatever reason, the bin hasn't arrived within 5 days. So people pick up the phone again. The ability to preempt that call by proactively saying, sorry, there's been a delay in your bin, it's going to be a further week now, is another way. Similarly, if there's been a lot of changes in sort of receptacles or services, so some councils have brought on board garden waste that didn't exist previously, or they've gone from having a bag to a plastic container for paper. Accompanying that change of service with information that could preempt a user contact. For example, explaining what day or the subscription service that you need for garden waste is another way to go about reducing these contacts, because a lot of people, they see a change in receptacle and the first thing they do is go to the phones to work out whether the day has also changed or what should go in this thing or how do I get a garden subscription. So proactive information along with a change of service is really key.
I'd like to add a point on this, and it goes back to what chatbots can do to improve a user's experience. One thing is what we're looking at, how can we reduce the calls, and this gives you a kind of commercial advantage. But there's also about the proactivity. So many people mentioned that if they ordered a new bin, for example, it's like, well, I had no clue that it had been delivered. You know when it shows up, when it's just appeared in your driveway. People are very used to like the Amazons of the world, where you get a text message or an email saying, we will deliver your thing today. And as a paying customer, that's the sort of expectation that people have. So even in this case, it's not making them call you because you're still delivering the bins within the time that you said you did. It would still reassure people and remove anxieties and improve that experience. So it's worth kind of noting the two sides of the potential value of the chatbot or that proactivity. Is it kind of saving you money, and is it improving the user's experience of that service?
Great, thanks, Louisa. So I thought it would be useful to just show this slide because, in fact, I should have done it last week, but just to just take a step back and think about where there's a valid use case for chatbots and where there really isn't, because this is definitely the sort of the overarching theme that we're considering as we look at the data. And if you kind of work from the bottom to the top in this, you've got three types of user inquiry. The first is basic information request. What day is something happening? When is this? Where is the tip? What are the opening hours? Information that really could be served by a website. There's not really an exchange. It's a simple one-directional transaction. Next level up is a task-based inquiry, so filling in a form or making a payment or getting an action completed. In this example, I want to order a replacement bin. And then the very top one, complex human-driven inquiries. We saw a lot of these in planning. This is where there's necessarily an extent of subjectivity or complexity to the conversation, things that we would certainly not ever envisage an AI replacing the need for a human. The point behind showing this slide is that those bottom two, they're the really great use cases for chatbots, and they're where we can free humans up to be having the complex ones that couldn't possibly be done by an AI. So this is sort of broad categorization that we're looking at. And if we then look at waste recycling data, so these are the main reasons for contact for Doncaster across both phones and web forms. And I've categorized them into the main buckets, the three buckets that you saw on the previous slide, so complex, task-based, and information. And you can see with waste recycling, 99% of contacts are within that sweet spot, that potential. It's very easy. It's either an information request or it's a simple task. Very predictable, small set of inquiries. By contrast, last week we saw only less than 40% fell into these categories. A lot within planning are what we'd consider complex human-led negotiations or follow-up to a named human being who you're expecting to speak with, or even contesting a decision. Then looking at the different methods of making contact with the council, this is all waste data. So what's interesting here is, while there's a fairly even split between face-to-face, telephone contact, and website self-service, when you look at the cost of provisioning each of these, it's something like 15 pence per contact on the web self-service, a couple of pounds on £2.12 on the telephone, and about £4 face-to-face. So while you've got fairly even at a high level split of methods, the benefit financially for councils in terms of directing people towards web self-service is very clear when you start looking at cost per serve, which again we were able to do because of the quality of the data that was provided this week. Lastly, so this is one of the key quotes, but I think this wrapped up nicely the position for the week. So budgetary constraints are one of the biggest concerns for council. We want to save money, but it's not just about value, it's also about efficiency in these services while striving for excellence. I think that's where digital comes in, with channel shifting the customer mindset. So as Louisa observed, a lot of customers want to be able to self-serve. Councils are moving towards having all of the services available for self-service. And there's a recognition, and the data backs this up, that self-service is far more economically viable than providing face-to-face or phone contact. So without wishing to preempt the rest of the research, I think both from a user perspective, from a council perspective, there's a really strong case to be made for waste with respect to an AI or chatbot, particularly given how the vast majority of contacts are these info or task-based requests. And I'd also like to just finish by making the point that this level of analysis is only possible with really good data. It was really helpful to have such strong data this week. We're a little bit short for next week, and I know not everybody's on the phone for that, but this kind of speaks to the value of sharing as much core data, web chat data, website data as you can get your hands on. So this is me just sort of banging my drum that please bombard me with data. There's no such thing as too much. It makes my life much easier when it comes to the analysis. But yeah, thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tom and Louisa. So the next part really is a chance for, I think, Rotherham and Bolsover. So Amanda, I can see you and Kristen on the line. Let's start with Kristen, because I know you were both supporting Kyle and Louisa on site in North East Derbyshire, but also running interviews yourself in Bolsover.
Multitasking.
Yeah.
I found it really useful actually having Louisa and Kyle there on the first few days, because it gave me an idea of what I needed to be doing and the questions that I needed to ask, and mostly reining people in as well, because people want to talk about everything and I wasn't used to having to sort of narrow that down. So yeah, it's definitely worth thinking about how you're going to tackle that when you do your own user research. My findings were very, very similar to Louisa's. I'm not surprised, because Bolsover and North East Derbyshire have a joint policy, and the senior management is also the same, so working practices are generally the same with the customer services. But the key thing was that most people were, again, going onto the website or going online to find what they wanted and not finding it. We had 4 out of the 6 people went onto the website first. So they were Googling the web address, clicking on the link, and then looking for what they wanted. The ones that did that struggled to find what they needed. Those that had gone straight to a search engine like Google found what they needed sooner. But 5 out of 6 of them, I think it was, hoped to deal with everything that they needed to deal with online, and they weren't able to do that, either because they couldn't find what they were looking for information wise, or there wasn't the ability to do it online. But all of them would have preferred to do a transaction online or to find the information online. nobody said, yeah, I would rather have just phoned up. It just, the feedback I got from a few people was that, generally speaking, with anything, not just waste related, they would rather go online and do that because they can do it out of hours. So if it's a web chat and it's out of hours and it's a chatbot, they don't really care as long as they're getting the answers that they need. And I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier, is it's not complex information, it's not complex queries, it is fairly straightforward transactions or information finding. So you shouldn't really need to speak to somebody, but the majority ended up having to phone, which is disappointing. And it was frustrating for them because they were having to find time to phone during work hours and so on and so forth. So yeah, similar findings, definitely. It's interesting to see Tom's summary, stakeholder stuff. Ties in very well with what users have been saying.
Great, thank you so much.
Who'd like to go next?
We can go next from Rotherham if that's okay.
Brilliant, thanks Amanda.
So what I think the findings for me and Amanda that I perhaps didn't necessarily expect is the older generation have definitely got a grasp on using technology. I think we're too quick sometimes to write them off, and that they would be the people that would be the contacting us through our contact centre. So that was really quite interesting. The thing that kept coming up time and time again was the feedback between reporting something to the council and just updates and how useful that would be. So again, it goes back to the preempting that potential future contact, and how can we, stop that and provide a better customer service. I'm not necessarily sure how a chatbot would do that. I know we are implementing at Rotherham a Jardo system whereby if customers want to do things online, they can log into an account and they'll get real-time updates through a bit of a chat with an officer in the back office, basically. So that's how we envisage that working. And then, so the last thing from me that I still am a bit quizzical about is everybody said that, or most people, their first way in was through the website, but it was sometimes difficult to find what they needed to find. My question to answer is, if we make the content on the web page better, is there a requirement for a chatbot? Because if they can get the relevant information just on the website, and that's all a chatbot is pulling information from, is there the requirement to invest in a chatbot? So that's something that we need to think about. Is anything from you, Amanda? No, I think you covered it all.
I would agree with that, actually. I was asking myself the same question, is that if we were improving our self-service and we were improving our website and there was the information there, then is a chatbot required, or to the same extent as what we're thinking about now?
Yeah, because did anybody specifically get a user that said, well, if you had a chat facility, because we didn't get anybody that came out and said that. They said if the website, if the website was better, easier to navigate, it was only if we sort of put the suggestion to them, well, if we had a chat facility, or have you used it previously? Our users said, yeah, we've used it for various different things, but it would depend on what I'm using it for. But nobody specifically came out and said, well, why don't you have
That's
a chat?
interesting, because we have web chat at Bolsover and North East Derbyshire, and obviously it's somebody in the back office replying to the questions, but it's only on certain days and certain hours when they've got the staff in there, so they can switch it on and off if we've got people to do it. One of the users that came in for Bolsover did say that they found it frustrating that there wasn't web chat available out of hours. So obviously we are providing that within hours, but people are wanting to do these things from home in an evening when they might everybody else is not at work, kind of thing. So yeah, it's a good question.
I think it's a very interesting point, and there's a couple of points to consider with that. I think The first one, and if we go back to the nature of user research, we wouldn't expect our users to know what solutions that they need, but our jobs as researchers is to understand what their problems are, what is it that ultimately they're trying to achieve, and what are the things which are driving their behavior. And from that, we can speak with, we can look at the current landscape, the current sort of provision that each council has, and then understand, in which case would a chatbot be a good or a bad solution. And that's something that we will work in further detail later on in the project when we're putting the framework together. But for sure, having a good website with the information available is the first step in that direction. It would be the first step to really enable such technology to work. Like, we would not expect chatbot technology to work well if the information didn't exist in real time online. So it's a really good point to raise. And again, I feel like you shouldn't expect to be building a chatbot if you don't have the information online in the first place. And some councils have more things in place than others online, or some councils, as we heard earlier, have a bit more in place for like that real time information, with the example of, if my bin doesn't get collected and I call to complain, some councils know exactly at that point why that is, and others have to wait until later in the day.
Yeah, I'd just echo that. Given a choice between website optimization and cleaning up a chatbot, it's a no-brainer. A good, solid, robust website is a prerequisite. But something it's also worth thinking about. It's very easy to just narrowly think of a chatbot as a chat window in the bottom right hand of a web page. But I'd encourage you to, when you are thinking about the solution side of things, which isn't entirely appropriate during all stages of user research, but seeing as we're there, conversational AI opens up a two-way dialogue, which a website can't do. So, for example, and it doesn't even have to be on a web page; it could be via SMS. So, and thinking here about the preempting customer needs, a conversational AI could make the first contact via SMS to all customers in the neighbourhood, saying, "There's snow forecast. Your bins aren't going to be picked up. They're going to go out on Wednesday instead." No one's had to go online to do that. That's something that everybody has received due to existing data that councils have about them. So it's, and from there, a conversational AI could have sort of two-way dialogue. Which bins are going to be affected? It's going to be the green and black ones. And have that sort of exchange, which if you're self-serving on a website, you're rummaging around to try and find that information. And a lot of the teams who I spoke to struggle with this, where services are impacted by weather or by changes, struggle to get the changes made to the website in time to sort of change the timetable of collections, for example. And in some cases, rather than leaving it up and having wrong dates, they just tear down the timetable altogether, in which, okay, we're just going to not have any timetable while the snow is up, which is almost encouraging people to pick up the telephone because the timetable's vanished. Sorry, that was a slightly meandering answer, but yes, back to the original question. Definitely website optimization is a prerequisite for doing any of the innovative conversational AI stroke chatbot stuff.
All right, thanks. Who wants to go next then to share findings? Who do we have next?
I think no one from Doncaster is in the call, just looking down the list. So it looks like everyone. Was there anyone else carrying out waste and recycling research this week?
Well, what I would really like to know as well, in not just around the key findings, is in terms of the process of doing the research itself. I'm really curious. We put on the channel some of our lessons learned, the things that made us mad, sad, and glad. But I was wondering if there was anything, any key learnings that would be worth sharing with the rest of the group, especially for people who are going to be doing their own research in the upcoming weeks.
Just before we moved on to that, Louisa, I know Claire did research this week, but I haven't heard from her so far. But I can see she's in the call.
Now?
Yay, Claire!
Yeah, sorry. Hi, I just say that what I went through reflects a lot, is reflected in what's already been said, and I would just confirm the thing about the preemptive stuff. It was only really one person who said that, but she was just like, well, for I can't remember, she was referring to other things like, I don't know, like the school or other things where she's told in advance if there's a change, and because she found that she did actually spend a lot of time trying to work out what to do that week, when it was a bank holiday. But equally, I guess it depends on the areas. Some of the customers were saying, well, actually, I'll just look out the window and look at what my neighbours are doing. So they don't, for some of the reasons, they didn't need to go on the website at all. But the other comment that made me laugh was that one of the mums said, oh yes, it's always something I remember just as I'm going to bed. Oh gosh, the bins. And I sort of totally agreed with her, because it's always the same for me. I'm always like 12 o'clock at night going, oh, I haven't done the bins yet, So yeah, people are trying to self-serve outside of hours.
Can I raise a question for all the councils? The issue about how much is available online is one that I've been sort of struggling with locally and trying to push our waste service along a little. One of the reasons there isn't more is because they offer a very personal service, what they would consider a very personal service, where they actually call round on people quite a lot. So if someone requests a bin, we encourage them to call so we can have a conversation with them about that, mostly around not really encouraging them to get a larger bin. If there's a problem with contaminated waste, they'll get a visit at the door. Which sounds really great, but it must be hugely costly, and it does feel like some of that stuff could be taken out of the equation with a first line request element. Does anyone else do that kind of very intense face-to-face stuff at the doorstep?
We do, as far as like you were saying, contaminated waste and stuff. We will send somebody out to explain what can and can't be recycled and things like that, but it's not really proactive. We wait for somebody to need that, to get in touch with them and say, oh, I need a bigger bin, and then say, well, you don't. If you recycle more, and this is how you do it. So yeah, I suppose it's weighing up the benefit of that, because like you say, it's very costly to do something like that. And if the information's there's no need. If you're providing clear information and it's kept up to date, whether it's on the website or whether it's something that goes out with the bin, it's not necessary, hopefully.
All right, and then quick question then, Claire, how did you find doing the user interviews then this week?
These ones are much easier because obviously I've done 6 the week before, so this time I was on a roll, and the subject wasn't quite so. I found with this subject, people's answers were a lot more contained, whereas when I was talking about planning, they would go off on a bit of a tangent. But everyone was fairly positive. The customer types were more varied. I did have 2 retired. One of which doesn't have any technology, so that's why she came in person, or she phones, sorry. And the other thing was communal living, so there's a difference between people who are householders and their experiences, and those that are living in a block of flats, because their issues are different. Their issues around, keeping the local area tidier.
Yeah, definitely. We definitely found patterns, or in certain types of users would either be someone who is like quite established in their home, or they're new to an address, whether they've bought a house or whether they're renting. If you move somewhere new, all the rules have changed, all the bins colors have changed, and all of a sudden you need all this information all over again. Interestingly, a big difference that we found as well is that it's not as emotional. Planning was something that we found to be a lot more emotional. It's very complex, quite subjective, very time consuming, whereas this tended to be a bit more matter of fact, a bit more logical. unless you were really put out by potentially someone stealing your bin, or in the case of one lady with 2 young kids, she asked to replace a bin, got given a smaller bin, and now has a lot of big waste bags in her house smelling of dirty nappies and cat litter that she can't get rid of. So it's things that really, really, when it tends to impact someone's life in a real way, at that point they start becoming quite emotional, and the interactions become a bit more difficult, let's say. In terms of any other lessons learned from the group, any other interesting things? I shared a funny anecdote about the mother that brought her kids that ate the pseudocreme. Does anyone have any interesting stories or any kind of key learnings from doing the user interviews that might be useful for groups in future?
So I've just got a question. So because for some of you didn't provide the incentive, so was it the case that all your customers still arrived for the interviews? Was there any difficulties with that?
We had one person that at the last minute had to cancel. Whether or not that was because there was no incentive, I don't know, because they didn't know, obviously, that was something we were potentially going to look to do. However, he did go online and do an online form, so he did still provide us with his experience at the council. He just unfortunately couldn't make it into us to do that. So
we prepared in advance, hadn't we, to make sure we could still capture some information.
And I think the people that we spoke to generally were more than happy to give us their opinion if they thought it was going to improve the service. I don't know if that was because one of the groups that we sort of like contacted about the user research, because we didn't go down the route of advertising it on Twitter or through social media. We had very specific groups that we've used previously in customer services for research and user testing and things like that. So, and one of the groups as part of that was like a community group. So I think the people that sit on that group are people that would genuinely be involved in things such as this. So we were quite fortunate in that way that I don't think anybody was expecting anything, and we provided bourbons, so that helped.
All right. And just, this last bullet point is mainly to check if anyone has any questions, if there's anything at all about the process that we're going through and the work that we're doing. If there's any questions, if anyone's unsure about anything, this is a good time to raise questions and for us to clarify any of these points.
I guess my only question is do you need anything else from us from waste and recycling? Do we need to send anything else through data-wise, or have you got enough?
Data-wise, waste and recycling, we're really good. My data concerns are all revenues and benefits. But no, thank you, Kristen.
No, I think from my side, all good. And again, I can only say thank you, Kristen, for all your help this week in setting everything up. As I think we've said this in the previous weeks, that we can't underestimate the value of prepping and helping, and from Tom's side, just giving all the data that you can get your hands on to help us with our work, and for us doing the user research, any help in getting set up in the rooms and taking people to and from, so we can focus on getting the most value from those days. So yeah, thank you, Kristen, for all your help.
Brilliant.
Tom?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, John.
Tom, what data do you want from Rev and Ben's? Is there anything we can provide, even though we're not in that group?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's really useful. The most useful one, well, it's the percentage of calls handled by the call centre that are to do with that service area, and then that broken out into what the main drivers of calls are. So that helps me then be able to work out the percentage which the first line respondents can do versus handing them off to back office teams and so forth. And then anything beyond that, it's quite, there's quite a lot of variety in terms of the extent to which call centre data has been chopped up and categorised, but more is better than less. But even if you just have those two metrics for any of your councils, that would be really, really valuable for me.
Okay. I might see if we can do some more on that as well then.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you.
Wonderful.
If anyone wants to volunteer for putting up all their data so we can put more on the site for other councils to see, you know, what's useful data, then I'd be really happy to take all that stuff and make something out of it. If the data is really good, it'd be really nice to do.
Okay. Yeah, I'll try and get some of that from us if we can. Just asking Amanda, because obviously I'm not fully aware of all the stuff that Contact Centre do here. We don't directly take the calls, they go straight into our Rebs and Bens service. But I'm in a meeting with Rebs and Bens on Monday afternoon, so I'll see if I can get something then off them.
Yeah, same here.
Great.
Fantastic. Yeah, that would be great.
And so the final thing from us really is what's happening next. So as you all know, we'll be in Redditch and Bromsgrove. Louisa and Carl will be on site in Redditch doing user interviews around revenues and benefits. I'm not sure if anyone from Preston or Ardra and Worthing is on the call, but yeah, we'll follow up with them afterwards to get a handle on their data and see how their recruitment is going.
Ian's here from Preston.
Cool.
There he is.
You're right. Yeah, I need to speak to the contact centre manager about the data. He's been off this week, so I just need to give him a nudge. We've done 4 interviews already, and we've got 2 planned next week. So.
Great.
Wow.
Brilliant. Will you have experience maps to share with us next week?
Yes.
Wonderful.
In fact, we're halfway through. Well, we've started sort of doing it with the 4 that we've had already. So.
Oh, that sounds like good progress.
So we're chipping away.
Okay, I think that's everything from me. Anything more for anyone else?
Yes, there's something really important we have to say, which is this role.
Did you have a good birthday celebration?
Yeah, it was fine, thank you. Yeah, quiet but fine.
I'm winning in the lottery this weekend, so that can be my celebration.
Always got to go on better.
Sorry.
Oh, very good. Well, thanks again, everyone, for coming along this week. We are finding it really valuable to share all of these findings with all of you and to hear how the weeks have been going for all of you as well. So yeah, it's always one of the highlights of the week when things start coming together and, you know, we can all share, and especially when you're seeing alignment between what we're all finding. So yeah, it's like really valuable. So thanks for taking the time. And yeah, I hope you have an amazing afternoon and a great weekend. And Redditch, see you next week.
See you all.
Okay, see you everybody.
Bye everyone.